The boarding announcement echoed softly through the private terminal lounge, a place where silence itself felt expensive, where leather seats gleamed untouched and champagne glasses waited for hands that never shook, and that was exactly why Daniel Carter felt like a mistake sitting there, his worn jacket folded carefully over his arm, his 6-year-old son Leo asleep against his chest, small fingers clutching the strap of a faded backpack as if it were the last solid thing in the world, because nothing about this place belonged to a single dad who counted groceries and stitched his own buttons, and yet here he was, holding a first-class ticket he didn't buy, didn't want, and didn't understand, a ticket forced into his palm minutes earlier by an overworked gate agent who had whispered, "Sir, the last seat was upgraded. Please just take it," as if fate itself were tired of arguing. Daniel almost refused, almost stood up to leave, but Leo shifted in his arms and sighed in his sleep, the way he did when he felt safe, and Daniel remembered the promise he'd made at his wife's grave 2 years ago, that no matter how heavy life became, he would never let their son feel it, and so he walked down the jet bridge into a world not meant for him, unaware that every step forward was tightening an invisible thread that led straight into the life of the most powerful woman on the planet. Across the aisle, surrounded by quiet awe and unspoken deference, sat Evelyn Ross, the billionaire CEO whose name moved markets, whose decisions collapsed companies and resurrected others overnight, the woman magazines called the Ice Empress, because no one could remember the last time they'd seen her blink under pressure, let alone smile, her tailored charcoal suit flawless, her posture perfect, her tablet glowing with figures that meant nothing to anyone else in the cabin, because Evelyn Ross did not fly commercial, ever, but today was different, today was strategic, a symbolic appearance before a global summit, a reminder that she could step into any world and command it, and she had taken the last available first-class seat with deliberate precision, unaware that the universe had quietly rearranged itself so that the man she had spent years trying to forget would end up sitting directly beside her. Daniel buckled Leo in carefully, his movements slow and practiced, whispering reassurances even though the boy was still asleep, smoothing his hair the way his mother used to, and when Daniel finally looked up, finally lifted his eyes from the small universe he'd built around his son, he felt it, that sudden, inexplicable tightening in his chest, the sensation of being seen before he saw, and when his gaze met Evelyn's, the air between them collapsed, time folding inward like a struck match. Because Evelyn Ross did not freeze for anyone, but in that moment, her fingers stopped mid-scroll, her breath caught just slightly, and something ancient and dangerous flickered behind her eyes. She knew that face. Not the tired lines, not the quiet strength etched by years of sacrifice, but the eyes, the same steady, infuriatingly gentle eyes that once looked at her when she was nothing more than a brilliant, angry scholarship student working 3 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night, the same eyes that had believed in her when no one else had, the same eyes she had walked away from the night she chose ambition over love, because success had demanded blood, and she had given it willingly. Daniel Carter was a ghost she had buried beneath boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, a chapter she had sealed shut with steel and silence, and yet here he was, breathing, aging, holding a child that was not supposed to exist in the version of reality she controlled. Daniel felt the recognition hit her before it hit him, saw the color drain subtly from her face, the micro-expression she failed to hide, and suddenly memory came crashing back, not as nostalgia, but as pain. Evelyn Ross, then Evelyn Wright, sitting across from him in a cheap diner, hands wrapped around cold coffee, telling him she was leaving, telling him she loved him but loved the future more, telling him he was too kind for the world she was entering, and him letting her go because he thought love meant not standing in the way of someone's dreams. He hadn't seen her since, not on screens, not in magazines, not even when her name conquered headlines, because survival had demanded tunnel vision, and yet now she was here, inches away, richer than nations, colder than memory, staring at him like she'd seen a ghost. Neither spoke. The plane began to move. The hum of engines filled the silence that stretched, thick and suffocating, as flight attendants pretended not to notice the tension crackling between them, and Leo stirred, blinking awake, yawning, his innocent eyes scanning the unfamiliar luxury before landing on Evelyn, who instinctively straightened. The billionaire tightened, suddenly unsure how to exist in front of a child who looked at her without fear or reverence. Leo smiled. The open, unguarded smile of a child who hadn't yet learned to measure people by power, and whispered, "Hi," and that single word shattered something in Evelyn Ross that boardroom battles never had. Daniel apologized softly, embarrassed, but Evelyn shook her head automatically, her voice delayed by half a second too long when she replied, "It's fine," and Daniel watched her struggle to compose herself, watched the woman who negotiated with presidents hesitate over a greeting, and for the first time, he understood that whatever she had become, whatever empire she ruled, she had never truly escaped the past. They talked, cautiously at first, small words layered over massive silences, Daniel answering questions without asking any, because single fathers learned long ago that curiosity could be a luxury, and Evelyn listening far more than she spoke, because every detail felt like a revelation: his modest job, his quiet life, the loss of his wife, the way his world now revolved entirely around the boy beside him. Then came the question she hadn't planned, the one that slipped out before she could stop it. "Is he yours?" Daniel nodded. "My son." The word hit her harder than any accusation. Her gaze dropped to Leo again, tracing his features with terrifying precision, and in that instant, calculations ran through her mind faster than any algorithm she'd ever written, timelines colliding, memories reordering themselves, a single, horrifying possibility taking shape, because Leo's eyes, those eyes, were unmistakable, and Evelyn Ross, billionaire, visionary, ruler of empires, felt fear for the first time in decades. Outside, the plane lifted into the sky. Inside, everything Evelyn Ross believed she controlled began to unravel. And as the cabin lights dimmed, as Leo leaned back against his father and fell asleep again, Evelyn stared straight ahead, frozen, realizing that the last seat on this plane hadn't just been taken by a single dad, it had been taken by the one truth she could never buy: silence, or escape. Evelyn Ross did not sleep for the rest of the flight, not because turbulence kept her awake or because messages from executives flooded her encrypted phone, but because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Leo's face superimposed over memories she had spent years burying beneath ambition, contracts, and power. And the terrifying part was not the resemblance alone but the way the child's existence rewrote history, turning choices she once believed were clean and logical into something far messier, something human, because as the plane cut through the clouds and the cabin settled into a muted stillness, Evelyn found herself replaying the last night she and Daniel had spent together, the rain hammering the windows of his tiny apartment, the argument that had started over nothing and ended with everything, the words she never said out loud, that she was afraid of being ordinary. Afraid of loving someone more than her future, and how she had left before dawn without looking back, unaware that life had quietly altered its course the moment she walked out that door. Daniel, on the other hand, had learned long ago how to exist inside emotional storms without showing it, because grief and responsibility had taught him restraint, and yet even he felt the weight of Evelyn's silence beside him, the tension humming like a live wire, her occasional glances toward Leo sharp with questions she refused to ask, and when the flight attendant offered champagne, Daniel declined with a polite smile while Evelyn accepted without tasting it, her thoughts spiraling toward a single unavoidable question that clawed at her chest: how old is he? She did the math unwillingly, dates aligning with brutal precision, and the truth settled over her with suffocating clarity, not as certainty, but as probability so high it made denial feel childish. When the plane landed, applause rippled through the cabin, but Evelyn remained seated long after others stood, watching Daniel carefully lift Leo into his arms, whispering that they'd arrived, that everything was okay, and something inside her fractured at the simplicity of it, at the fact that this man had built an entire universe around a child without needing permission, wealth, or applause. While she had conquered the world and still felt unmoored, she stood finally, straightening her jacket, slipping back into the armor the public recognized, but as they walked through the terminal side by side, strangers parting instinctively for her while Daniel blended into the background, she realized power had never felt so hollow. It was Evelyn who broke the silence first outside the private arrivals gate, the city skyline glittering beyond glass walls, her voice measured yet strained as she said, "Daniel, can we talk?" And Daniel hesitated, not because he feared her, but because he sensed that whatever conversation followed would alter the fragile equilibrium he had fought to maintain for years. Still, he nodded, because he had always been that man, the one who listened even when listening hurt, and they sat in a quiet lounge while Leo busied himself with a toy car, oblivious to the history compressing the air around them. "How old is he?" Evelyn asked, finally. 6, Daniel replied. The word landed like a verdict. Evelyn inhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the edge of the table, calculations collapsing into truth, and when she spoke again, the billionaire mask cracked just enough for vulnerability to bleed through. "Daniel, I need you to tell me something. And I need you to tell me honestly." He met her gaze steadily. "Ask. Is there any chance," she said, the words nearly catching in her throat, "that Leo is my son?" The world did not explode. It did not shatter dramatically. It simply went quiet. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, not in shock, but in exhaustion, and when he opened them, his expression carried the weight of a man who had carried this secret alone. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I found out after you left. You were already gone. And by the time I tried to reach you, you were untouchable." Evelyn's breath trembled. "Why didn't you try harder?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Because you looked happy. And because I promised myself I would never use a child as a reason to chain someone who chose to leave." Those words pierced deeper than any accusation could have. Evelyn looked at Leo, who laughed suddenly as his toy skidded across the floor, and tears burned behind her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed herself in decades, because this was not a hostile takeover or a scandal she could bury with lawyers. This was life, messy and irreversible, and she realized in that moment that every billion she owned could not buy back the years she had missed, the first steps, the first words, the nights Daniel had stayed awake alone, terrified and determined. "I want to know him," she said quietly. "I want to be part of his life." Daniel did not answer immediately. He watched his son, then looked back at Evelyn with calm resolve. "That's not my decision alone," he said. "And it's not something money can fix. If you're in as his mother, not as a billionaire, not as a headline." Evelyn nodded, tears finally escaping, not caring who saw, because for the first time since she was young, power meant nothing, and honesty meant everything. Outside, the city buzzed, unaware that in a quiet lounge, the richest woman in the world was learning how little she truly owned. If you want to see how Evelyn fights for redemption, how Daniel protects his son, and whether love can survive the weight of missed years, subscribe now and stay with the channel, because this story is only getting deeper, more emotional, and more unforgettable.